Thank you so much for joining us today for our Activate Diversity series. We're thrilled to have you here with us. I want to just take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Kelly Adams. I am the Diversity Director of this great general practice solo division. I am wanting to take time right now to thank our sponsors for this program. First, I'd like to thank our program co-sponsor, ABA Commission on Disability Rights and the Ohio State Bar Association. I'd also like to thank our premier division sponsor, Thomson Reuters. And lastly, our division sponsors, the ABA Retirement Funds and Tab 3 Software. Without wasting any more time, let me give you to our wonderful chair-elect, Henry Hamilton. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Kelly, and welcome to Activate Diversity. Today's program is dedicated to the memory of Scott LaBarre. Scott was chair of the ABA GP Solo and Small Firm Division. Scott passed away on December 10, 2022. Scott was a good friend and he is deeply missed. An accomplished advocate, skilled negotiator, and generous volunteer. He was relentless in his efforts to ensure that GP Solo's 23,000 plus members had the resources to be more efficient, more successful, and more profitable. Pertinent to today's discussion, Scott was an international advocate for individuals with disabilities. He was responsible for sweeping changes which have improved the lives of individuals with disabilities throughout the world and within our organization. Scott lost his vision at the age of 10, but despite his visual challenges, he lived his life the way he wanted, helping others pursue the lives they wanted. My nearly 30-year friendship with Scott was enormously rewarding, full of laughter and transformative conversations. Scott brought a unique and valuable perspective to our division leadership. I'm a better person because of Scott's friendship. GP Solo is a better organization because of his leadership. Millions throughout the world are one step closer to equality because of his life's work. While complimenting Scott and his life's work, we would be remiss if we did not draw attention to the conditions that exist which made his life's work necessary and highlight that such work is still left to be done. We know that individuals with disabilities are valuable and capable of enormous contributions. Given the environment to succeed, they will succeed. This year is the 155th anniversary of the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment guarantees all persons equal access and due process under the law. Too often, we have fallen short. For instance, millions of individuals with disabilities do not have usable access to website or internet content. That problem must be addressed. Our profession fares no better. As we sit here today, thousands of individuals with disabilities are deprived of accommodations that would allow them to complete their undergraduate and/or law school studies. Many are not provided the simplest of accommodations that would allow them to succeed in the courtroom or at the nation's law offices. In closing, let me end by saying this. GP Solo is proud to be the home of America's lawyers and law students with disabilities. Scott committed his career to furthering the promises of equality for all individuals. He possessed a deep passion and understanding for the rights of individuals with disability. GP Solo is committed to picking up where Scott left off. And with that, I would turn the program back over to Haley Moss. Folks, enjoy this wonderful program. Thank you.
Thank you, Henry, and thank you, Kelly, both for your remarks, and thank you for sharing more about Scott and his legacy here at GP Solo. My name is Haley Moss. I am a diversity fellow this year within the division, and it is my pleasure to get to moderate this event and get to introduce a little bit more about the housekeeping, what to expect today, and also to lead and facilitate this conversation with our absolutely fantastic panelists. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to thank the committee from the GP Solo Diversity Board, our subcommittee that helped plan today's event. The members of our subcommittee are myself, Chisa Putnam, Kelly Adams, and of course the many amazing people. So we had Marianne Rebel Brown on the diversity board, and I would like to also thank our GP Solo staffers who had helped make everything happen and made sure things run smoothly. So a huge thank you to Steve Wilde, Kim Koshin, and Sherry Napway for all that you do and making today and every day happen at GP Solo. Without further ado, we're going to talk a little bit about housekeeping for today. So today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted on GP Solo's YouTube channel for future viewing. If you were not able to make it live, please do not worry. We will be there for the future as well. And we thank all of you who did take the time to attend live today too. Kind of coming off the heels of what Henry was sharing with all of us too, accessibility is something that is important to all of us, that we should have it that you're able to toggle on and off closed captions if there's something that should be helpful to you. We are in webinar mode, so our attendees are in listen only mode. If there's something that would be helpful to you, please let us know and we will do our best in order to accommodate. As for questions for our panelists, you will have the opportunity to submit questions via text by typing your questions into the questions panel that is available to you. So there's that little Q&A button, that Q&A function. You can send in questions anytime during our webinar, and we will collect them and address them during our Q&A session at the end of today's discussion. Chisa will be generous enough to help us out with that Q&A at the end. If it's easier for you to ask questions out loud instead of write your question out, please use the raise your hand feature available to us here on Zoom, and we will promote you to be able to ask your question verbally out loud. Without further ado, it is my honor to get to introduce today's panelists that are, I believe, in the chat. We will also have their bios posted for you. So that way I do not have to read everybody's information. Our panelists are incredibly accomplished. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to present to you Claudia, Baldwin, Denise Avant, and AJ Link. I'm really excited for today's discussion, and I'm going to ask everybody if they feel comfortable to share a little bit more about themselves. I suppose I should probably do the same as well. But I'm really looking forward to hearing from everybody. And I suppose to start off, I would like to pass it over to AJ if you would like to give a quick introduction.
Hey y'all, my name's AJ Link. I am a Black dude with a beard. I've got on a green hat and a salmon shirt. Behind me there are two frames, one the picture of the skies because I love space, and the other is a sticker chart that I did with my partner. I got more stickers, so we got it framed. I don't know how much background I'm supposed to give, but I am the founding president of the National Disabled Law Students Association, and I am one of the co-founders of the National Disabled Legal Professionals Association. I've done lots of disability, accessibility, and justice work within the legal profession and beyond that. And my day job is a policy analyst at the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. My bio's in the chat, so I'll stop talking and let the other amazing panelists give their intros.
Thank you so much, AJ. Denise, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit to everybody?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me be part of your panel this afternoon. My name is Denise Avant. I am an African-American woman. I have brown hair, and today I am wearing a light pink top. I am sitting in front of the window as it's nice, bright and sunshiny day here in Chicago. Just briefly, I currently serve on the American Bar Association's Board of Governors. I am the immediate past chair of the American Bar Association Commission on Disability Rights. I also served as a commissioner on the Commission on Disability Rights and have served in many other ABA roles. I am also a national board member of the National Federation of the Blind, which is where Scott Labar and I first worked together. So I will turn it over to the next panelist.
Hello. Yes, hello. My name is Claudia Baldwin. I am a Latino female. I am visually impaired. I'm a blind veteran. I served in the United States Air Force. I lost my sight at 24, so I wasn't born blind. And, you know, so obviously it felt like a very traumatic thing to me at the time. But Since then though, I'm always been a go-getter, and I believe that with my disability, I became a lot more vocal about just injustice and unfairness, just for me to do everyday things, or even any anyone else with disabilities. I guess, I was kind of put into this disability situation, and I feel like sometimes, when you don't have a disability, you don't notice as much as you do once you're in that role, in that world, I guess, of disability. And so I feel a very, a blessing, even though being blind can be difficult or challenging. I still feel it's a blessing because I've been able to do so much more things than when I was sighted. And so I just, I'm very honored to be here and to share my just my opportunities, my experiences, and I guess I'll turn it over to you, Haley.
Thank you all so much for sharing a little bit about yourselves. And something that makes this event particularly powerful, at least this panel, is that each one of us is somebody who identifies as having a disability. And that really kind of goes back to this thing that I know not everyone in our audience perhaps is familiar with, but there is a old saying in the disability rights movement and community of nothing about us without us, meaning often that people are trying to tell our stories for us, or that we're often not the main characters in our own stories. And just like Claudia was saying in how she was telling her story, that our stories are powerful. They help humanize disability, and each one of us has a different journey with how we got here and identifying with disability. I know, kind of to jump right into our discussion, there is a lot of questions. There are lots of people who are curious, and something that's come up that I get asked a lot about, and I know that has come up even in calls that I was on earlier today, is all about language and how we talk about disability. So if any whoever wants to jump in first, if there is something that you feel comfortable about when it comes to how you describe yourself and your relationship with disability.
This is Denise Avant. I don't I usually refer to myself as a blind person. I was born blind, and I have no problems with someone saying that I'm blind or me saying that I'm blind. I do not necessarily feel that it's necessary to say that I am a person who is blind. I am, proud of my accomplishments. I think that blindness is not the characteristic that defines me or my future. And I do believe that given the training that I have had with regards to blindness skills training, that I can live the life I want. And I have in fact lived the life that I wanted. I became a lawyer. Even though I'm retired now, I still participate in things that are important to me. I do extracurricular activities. So I don't mind identifying myself as blind.
This is AJ. I refer to myself as autistic. Similar to Denise, I don't refer to myself as a person with autism, but I think one of the most important parts of being disabled and navigating your disabled identity is being able to decide for yourself how you want to identify and how you want other people to identify you. I think, Haley, to your point around conversations about disability, a lot of people are unfamiliar with disability in the disabled community, and they have disabiliphobia in terms of navigating conversations that may be hard or nuanced. And I think it's really important that we have panels like this and other information sharing sessions and opportunities for folks to be able to ask questions to better equip themselves to navigate having those conversations about disability, self-identity, and just the disabled experience in general. And I would also point out that the disabled community is very diverse. The deaf community is different than the blind community, is different than the autistic or neurodivergent community. And all those communities have developed their own unique cultures. And I think that that's really, really cool.
I would also agree. Well, like Denise, I also identify myself as being a blind woman. In the fact, like she said too, I don't, that doesn't define who I am. I am Claudia, and hey, everybody knows me as Claudia, and that's what I want people to know me as. But I do also make sure that I do let individuals know I am blind, because obviously I may have some issues, like I can't recognize you or something like that when I'm having a conversation with someone, and say, hey, next time if you see me, I might not be able to see me, just say hi to me so I don't ignore you. I'm not conceited, I promise, things like that. But I also think it's an opportunity to educate others. Like AJ said, if people know, like, oh, you're autistic. What is that like? And it just opens up the conversation of sharing the knowledge, and hopefully that individual will learn a little bit more about the disability itself. They may not know anyone that has that, or they do and they had no idea, or so I just think that that's for me, it's important to let individuals know, just so they can hopefully learn a little bit about, well, for me, blindness or any other issues that I have. So.
Thank you all so much for sharing. So I have a very similar take as well from my experience. I also refer to myself as autistic, but when I talk about the community as a whole, sometimes I will go between disabled people and people with disabilities, because I know there are different rules in different subcultures, like AJ, in customs, like AJ was saying. But I try my best to use the two interchangeably just because of that. And I also think when it comes to best practices, I know that's something we're also thinking about. I try my best to respect how every single person feels, because not everybody is using what we are. When we say that we're blind or autistic, we're using what is known as identity first language, and not everybody does that. So I always try to meet people where they're at. If there's anything in this language discussion, is there anything that you feel truly uncomfortable with that people say? Personally, for me, that is when people say special needs, because I don't think my needs are special. They're just human. And sometimes they need a little bit more support. But I'm wondering if there's anything else that you may have a specific sore spot for, so folks know not to say something or to avoid.
This is AJ. I really hate differently abled.
I do too.
That's one of my pet peeves as well.
Okay, so I think that's a pretty fair bet too. I actually had a discussion with somebody earlier today and gently pushed them away from differently abled as well. So I'm glad that seems to be a point of agreement around here. And kind of moving out of just language, I know just the way that we have been talking about our experiences, most likely a lot of us have this very common experience of being treated differently or having assumptions made about you just because of a disability. Is there one misconception, if you had the choice, about your specific disability that you just wish would go away entirely?
I'll go ahead and jump in. I think really overall is the low expectations people have regarding people who are blind, and that we are unable to think for ourselves or speak for ourselves. One of the things that I wish would definitely go away is people's feeling that they need to come and grab us. When we are walking down the street, or when we just come in a room, automatically people come up and just, start grabbing and say, oh, let me help you, let me, as opposed to, would you like any help? Do you need my assistance? Getting somewhere. I think people just kind of feel the need to help before asking, and they invade your personal space. So that's probably the one thing that I wish would go away, is the invasion of my personal space.
I would second that. Yeah.
Yeah, this is AJ. I think that's why. I think that also happens to people who use wheelchairs or other mobility devices too. And a lot of folks don't understand that that's a huge invasion of space and privacy. But for me, as someone who grew up and didn't know I was autistic until I was an adult, something that I experienced was people thinking I was like bad or had troubling behavior, rather than just needing different kinds of support. And now that I am an adult, that's kind of reversed. Denise talked about low expectations. I often get a lot of, you don't seem autistic, or you don't act very autistic, which is a wild thing to say to someone who's going through life. So I would say there's just a general frustration that people don't understand what it means to be autistic. Not every autistic person is like the white dudes on TV and in movies, right? Like, I'm not Rain Man or The Good Doctor, all those horrible depictions of autistic people, right? I'm a unique human being, and I experience life in a unique way, just like everyone else does.
I am so grateful you mentioned the TV stereotypes personally, because I have a very similar experience. And for me, something on with autistic people in particular is not only just those low expectations and you don't look autistic, which I would be retired if I got a nickel every time somebody has said that in my life. And not only would I be retired, I am under 30, which is always how I like to put that in perspective. And for me, one of the biggest misconceptions I'd like to clear out is kind of going off the point about the white guys on the spectrum, is that it's not just children, it's not just little boys in particular, little white boys, that disability as a whole is incredibly intersectional, as it also is represented by this panel. And a lot of what we've been saying sounds an awful lot like experiences with what is known as ableism. So for those who are unfamiliar, a very simple and not quite complete definition of ableism is really just these instances of discrimination and prejudice against people with disabilities. And each of us, it appears, has experienced ableism in a very different way. And I'd like to ask the panel what ableism means to you and how that might be showing up in your life before we eventually transition to talking about the legal profession.
Well, you oftentimes you will, this is Denise again, oftentimes you will get people who will make comments, and they're little microaggressions. They probably mean them as a compliment. And they'll say something to me like, oh my God, you do that better than I can, and I can see what I'm doing. So again, it goes back to the low expectations. You don't expect me to, since I can't see, you don't expect me to do things well. You don't expect me to do them as well as a sighted person. Instead of maybe seeing me as a person who may have to make some accommodations for, my blindness, you see it as kind of a weakness, a lower than, a less than. So I think that that's one of the things that we confront. People don't mean to, say things, but they don't understand that when they say things, that their words do have consequence, and we face them every day, and we try to educate as best we can, but still they're there.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. I get that too. I also feel just lack of including you because you can't see, or they think they You have to be babysat. I am an adult. I can do everything on my own. I live on so it's like for people not to invite you to things because they feel I don't know what that I'm gonna get hurt or I'm going to I don't know. It's just I get that a lot. Or I have gotten a lot of that since I lost my sight is, less friends want to hang with you or less, even family members, whatever the case. And and I see that it's because I feel like they just don't know how to deal with the situation instead of actually asking me, hey, is there something that maybe would make it easy? I don't know, and it's probably not even an issue, so it's just it's like they have preconceived potential issues that are probably not even there. And so I feel like I've experienced that. But definitely what you said, Denise, I've absolutely experienced that all the time. Low expectations, but so
This is AJ. I have a non-apparent disability, so my experience with ableism is a bit different. I'm often in rooms where folks don't know I identify as disabled, and a lot of it has to do with the language people use and the lack of education and ignorance around disability a lot of people use. Something that really gets to me, and I know like language isn't the end all be all, and folks only have access to the language they've been taught. But when people say things like turn a blind eye to something when there's like a ton of other very literal expressions you can use instead of that metaphor, it's like that phrase is often used in a negative way. It's like being blind is negative. And, for me, as someone with a developmental disability who works closely with the intellectual disability community, it's like things like when people say crazy or dumb or stupid or insane, like these words, a lot like I've used those words before, right? I'm not going to say that I've never used those words, but the ableism is so insidious in our culture that we're okay with using language like that. Like you think about the R slur is still widely accepted, I guess, in comparison to other slurs and things like that. And people are allowed to talk about disability in a way that's just so disrespectful in ways that you really just don't see with other identities. I think about the words like handicapped and people still saying handicapped parking or something like that. It's just a real lack of societal education about where the disability rights and justice movements have pushed the culture, and I wish more folks actually took the time to educate themselves to realize all the to Denise's and Claudia's points, like the microaggressions and the kind of just low-key ableism.
Thank you all so much for sharing a little bit more. So I've had a lot of different experiences, but I like that we talked about microaggressions. And even when AJ mentioned something on language, I know I am also guilty of that. And that's things I'm still learning to do better with. So something that I feel like is worth mentioning is that you do not get essentially like you can still be ableist even though you also are disabled yourself. And that's something that I think is a complicated relationship for folks to sometimes reckon with. But kind of moving our discussion in the next part is that we want to make
before we move on, I'm sorry, this is AJ. I just want to add that you can be non-disabled or not identify as disabled and experience ableism and be affected by ableism. You don't have to be disabled to be impacted by it.
Absolutely. And I'm grateful that you added that note too. But I think it's just so interesting, that relationship for us. And we're going to be talking about disability and the legal industry and profession. So kind of to set the stage on this part of our time together is that according to the National Association for Law Placement, they did a 2022 report on diversity in U.S. law firms. And they found that about 1% of lawyers will self-identify with having a disability. That is not a lot of people. So for all of you who attended and registered for today's webinar, we mentioned in the description that about 1 in 4 Americans has a disability. So I am actually going to start with Denise on this one, actually. Why do you think perhaps that so few lawyers are self-identifying as having a disability?
I think it's the stigma that's attached to it. Especially those lawyers who may have mental health disability. There is definitely a stigma attached to being disabled. I can remember I talked to a friend some years back, and the person does have a mental health issue. He was interviewing for a job, and in fact, he had gotten the job, but once they figured out what his accommodation needs were, because he didn't disclose initially, but he said that they withdrew the offer. So I think that it's one of those things where people don't want to disclose because of the stigma. I even know people, lawyers who have low vision. They're not totally blind, but they won't use a cane or any of those kinds of things because they are afraid of the stigma that's associated. And people don't want to be, othered, as we say in society. So I think that that's really the key reason why many lawyers don't self-identify. And then you also have the idea that some folks feel that lawyers feel like if you have a disability, that makes you weak in some fashion. So people try to stay away from self-identifying.
Thank you so much. And Claudia and AJ, I know both of you are also within the legal profession and are not practicing lawyers. So does this also ring true for folks that are in the field, went to law school, or otherwise in the legal industry? Is that same thing that few people are identifying and kind of going off of what Denise was saying?
Well, so I feel like for myself, I feel hesitant, not because I know what I can do, but I just feel like what Denise says, like they just, if individuals have low expectations or just no knowledge of what a blind person can do, then I feel like I'm just, I'm just hurting myself. And so, like, I prefer to disclose, but I'm always afraid that that's going to come back and be negative, and that has happened. Where I know I was very qualified, but I just don't get the job, and or maybe there were many other. I just feel like that is an issue. Um, but I mean, currently though, I have a great employer who's very supportive, and so I'm happy about that. So
This is AJ. I think stigma is a huge thing, as Denise said, and also a little bit of internalized ableism. So there are people who maybe have disabilities or qualify as a disability under the ADA, but they don't believe that they're disabled. I've met lots of older disabled folks who don't identify that way just because of all the trauma that they've experienced growing up with a disability. But then people with mental health disabilities.
Zoom update. Efficiency mode active button removed from toolbar. Your battery is running low. Performance button added to toolbar. Zoom update. Efficiency mode active button removed.
So someone who maybe has substance abuse disorder may not view it that way. I know, over the past decade, the legal profession has made a real push in mental health, but doesn't associate that with disabilities like addiction. So I think it's really difficult, especially if you're in law school and you're a law student, talking about non-practicing attorneys and getting into the legal profession. If classmates think that you're quote unquote cheating because you have accommodations, that can cause a real problem, right? There's still a huge stigma around that. I think Denise's story about the person having a job offer revoked is illegal. So like you can't do that. And it's just, it's really frustrating. I'm really happy that there's a movement of law students and early career professionals who are starting to self-identify and advocate and creating resources and employee affinity groups and all of those kinds of things to provide support and community. But it's still really difficult, and it's a long process.
Thank you so much for sharing. And all of you started touching on disclosure and sharing that you have a disability with employers or potential employers and even colleagues and fellow students while you're in law school. And I think I have to ask is, how do you have those conversations around sharing that you are blind or autistic or that you have a disability?
This is Denise. I think for me, it may be a little different because I have been blind all of my life. So from a time when I was in grade school, I had to advocate for myself. And the only way that you can really advocate for yourself is if you go to your teacher, to your, when you get to college, to your professor or whoever your interaction with and say, I'm blind. I need you to, well, of course, it was a blackboard when I was coming up in school. I need you to tell me what's on the blackboard because I can't read it. Or I need the assignments. If I'm in law school, I need whatever assignments you're going to give, I need them beforehand so that I can go get someone to read them to me. Nowadays, it's a matter of going to the Disability Student Service Office and getting them to convert books into an electronic format. So as a person who has a visible disability and who has had it all of my life, you have to be willing to go up and talk for yourself, because if you don't, there is going to be nobody who will. I know when I was interviewing way back when, I often did not say on my resume that I was blind, but because of the way I phrase certain things or put certain activities down, they could draw a conclusion that I either had low vision and was blind. And I felt like it was up to them to prepare for the interview and for me to come into the interview prepared to answer questions about how I was going to do the job.
This is AJ. I think it's different for me slightly with a non-apparent disability. Unless, to Denise's point, they look at my resume, it's pretty embedded with disability advocacy. But having soft disclosure options like the National Disabled Law Students Association or the National Disabled Legal Professionals Association is really helpful. But for someone like me who's a public advocate, if anyone does due diligence and looks me up, they'll know I'm disabled. So I don't feel like I have to necessarily have that conversation. And I think it's a different conversation for folks with physical or apparent disabilities than folks with non-apparent disabilities, right? Especially if your apparent disability is you using a mobility aid or you having a cane or something like that. So for me, it's really easy to just be autistic because that's my identity and that's who I've created or how I've created my professional identity. But for students, I think it's really difficult in navigating that and deciding how you want to have those conversations. And I don't think students have enough resources at their individual institutions to help them with that. I know that there are national organizations and things like Ask Jan and other resources that help with those kinds of things. But I think law schools are still really struggling to teach students how to navigate those conversations in their interviews.
I think that the American Bar Association, the Commission on Disability Rights, has been very helpful in that arena. I do know that there was resolution pushing for a cultural competency, and that includes, without a doubt, disability, and that law schools begin to teach to law students about people with disabilities, lawyers with disabilities, students with disabilities, members of the public who have disabilities, because how are you going to, because lawyering is basically a public service industry. Well, how can you competently serve the public if you don't understand the various cultures, including disability? I think that many of the law schools could improve. I think that as times change and professors change, that improvement will come about. I think that law schools have a way of making disabled students feel othered. For example, and I was surprised to learn some years ago that if you are taking a class, you're not supposed to have a laptop in class. Well, if I'm a student with a disability, if I'm a blind student, or if I have another disability and I need to be able to take notes, automatically I have a laptop so I can be able to do that. But my other classmates, they're looking at me like, oh, you're getting a special, you're getting some kind of special thing because you're allowed to have a laptop, and we're not. And I think that if law students would kind of take a look at those kinds of policies, they might find it much easier to handle the issue of disability. I think that if they start to really teach cultural competency, including disability, as part of professional responsibility, they might take a look at themselves and see where they can improve.
This is Haley, 100% with you on that. So one story that I always like to share when we're talking about law school is my law school had a on-campus clinic that represented foster youth largely. And a lot of these children and young people were people with disabilities, and a lot of them would have individualized education plans in order to receive accommodations and whatnot as well, and receive special education services. And at the time, a lot of the clinic students would come to me as someone who was very open about being autistic and ask me all these questions about individualized education plans. And I was never even in that clinic. And I would always decline every request for assistance, like, hey, just because I may or may not have had this as a child does by no means make me an expert. And I'm not even in this clinic. I'm not getting graded. I'm not representing your client. Why isn't your clinical faculty helping you with this? So I really am grateful for that point, that it does begin in law school, that people aren't getting that exposure, doing that learning. And for me, one thing that came up a lot with disclosure, as someone who also has a non-apparent disability, is I realized every time I would do it, especially in job interviews, people would ask me a lot more questions than what was on my resume. They would start asking me how I was able to do things, if I was competent. They'd start talking and going off script, talking about their family members or someone that they knew that might have been autistic. And all of a sudden, I knew that would just not bode well for me most of the time, unless it was someone who was a committed ally or who was a parent of a disabled child or someone who's disabled themselves that genuinely wanted to be a good ally and move the needle forward. So I'm grateful to everybody for what they've shared here. And kind of moving along when we're talking about this, something that comes up a lot in this profession and industry is about mentorship. So once you're in the door, once you're keeping things moving, and we've all touched on that bias and stigma surrounding disability. For me personally, that has made it very difficult to find and form mentoring relationships. And for a lot of us who are disabled lawyers and staff, what are some of the biggest roadblocks that you might be facing in those mentorship relationships or developing them?
This is Denise. I think that everybody needs a mentor. In fact, once you get your foot in the door, or even when you come into law school, you oftentimes you look for people who look like you. When I remember when I went to law school, there was another blind student in my class, and this was way back when, of course. But we went through the experience together. And so we were able to play off each other, come up with ideas for how we were going to do a particular assignment. Now, the work was our own, but we were still able to come up with ideas on how we were going to do the work. I understand that maybe a professor can't identify with being blind, but that does not mean that you shouldn't offer a blind student the same insights on how to practice law as you would a sighted student. And you let the student figure out, okay, based on what the professor has told me and talked to me about, what is it that I'm going to do as a disabled student to practice to be an effective student. The same in an employment setting. When you come into a firm or you come into a government office, your colleagues should offer you the same mentoring, and there should be a dialogue as to your needs. And based on what the mentoring relationship is, you as the blind person, you will make the adjustment, because after all, you've done it all of your life. So I really think that a lot of it just has to do with the person who doesn't have the disability just being willing to establish the relationship with a blind person, a person who has autism, or a person or who is autistic, or a person, you know, any other person with a disability.
This is AJ. I was just gonna see if Claudia wanted to add something.
This is Haley. Claudia, do you have anything that you would like to add about mentorship? You're on mute.
While she's unmuting, the other point I do want to make is I think that a lot of times those of us who have disabilities, oftentimes we will seek outside organizations. So for example, when I was practicing law, I sought out the National Association of Blind Lawyers, which is a division of the National Federation of the Blind. So oftentimes we will go to outside places to get the mentoring and the camaraderie that we need.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize. I didn't even know I had muted. I had some like technical issues, sorry. So yeah, what you were saying, I agree. It's like finding groups, finding, you know, that's what's going to help in order to find mentorship. So another thing, when I first became visually impaired, there, like the VA, the, you know, Department of Veteran Affairs has like a case manager that assists any of visually impaired veterans. So what I like that the case manager did, because she obviously had a pool of blind veterans, she kind of would pair people with others. So like kind of what you did with your, you know, fellow student who was blind. And so that's what she did. She like paired me up with someone. At the time I was 24, she was like 30 something. And you know, and I thought it was great because she mentored me so well. And like, I looked up to her because she did so many things. And it was like you share best practices, you share all kinds of things, but she's also, you know, kind of my age. She's not, obviously, she didn't pair me with, you know, like a 70 some year old man because his experience probably a little different than me at 24. So, I thought that that was great. And so, yeah, definitely reaching out to different support groups out there, or just, you know, like type groups are always going to have other experiences that helps you in figuring out how to do things differently, or same with the employer earlier where we were talking about the whole disclosure. It's so important because I'm going to be the most productive with you as the employer, helping me help myself in doing the job, you know. So if you don't even, you know, if you don't care enough about your employees to want to know how best they will succeed, then you're just not going to succeed even in your own business, whatever you it is, whether it's, you know, your firm or whatever employment. And so I just think that's so important to really talk about what best will make you succeed, or your, you know, the individual with the disability to be the most successful. So
Thank you so much for that. And I've also personally found mentorship very difficult. So I would get paired randomly almost a lot of the time. And whenever I would get paired, there was always a communication gap for me, and perhaps someone who wasn't willing to learn and meet me where I was. And a lot of the time I would internalize that, and especially as a young lawyer, I thought it was my fault that my mentors weren't interested, or assigned mentors, because I know a lot of firms have assigned mentorship programs. I used to think they weren't interested in me. And it turned out that they were busy, or they weren't in a place to be taking on mentees, and it wasn't properly communicated to me. So I do ask, for those of you who are looking to maybe mentor a lawyer or staff member with a disability, that you do communicate what your availability, your expectations, all of these different things, because so often, especially as an autistic person who might miss that socially if it's not communicated, I always believed it was my fault, that maybe I was doing something wrong and I just didn't know it, when really that wasn't what was happening. So I do ask for that willingness to learn and good communication a lot of the time. And that for me was one of the many ways that disability made life a little bit harder in practice. But today is not just about the things that are difficult for us as well, that we are beyond the ADA, we are access at the forefront. And so often access is considered an afterthought for so many people. And every one of our panelists has touched on how inaccessibility has affected them within the field. But for each of us who has talked about our identities, it's also a source of strength and pride. So I'm going to ask the panel how disability might even improve your approach and experiences within the legal field and profession.
This is AJ. I can say that my experience doing disability advocacy and being immersed in disability culture has made me a better person and advocate, understanding that accessibility goes beyond just being accommodating to disabled folks, but being truly accessible for everyone. That that makes me better at the work that I do. It makes me better at understanding and empathizing with the needs of other folks in terms of supports, because not all support needs are because of disabilities. People require supports because we're all human beings and need support from one another. And so for me, being truly immersed in disability culture has made me a better person and advocate, and made me better at doing my job.
This is Denise. I think just adding to what AJ said, you really kind of appreciate intersectionality. No one is just disabled. There, you are probably you may be Black, you may be Asian, and you still have a disability, and you need to understand how that culture may impact on your on the person's view of the disability. And you will need to understand, as a lawyer out here practicing law, how cultures, different cultures view disabilities, because it will affect how your client, or how a student or another lawyer might act. I think that doing the work, especially being involved with the Commission on Disability Rights, obviously, as a blind person, I know what blind people are looking for, or the kinds of things that we need. We all need different things, because there's different levels of low vision and blindness. But also, being in the ABA and working with the broader disability community, I have come to appreciate other disabilities and their needs, and knowing that I need to ask, okay, what is it that you need? And willing to advocate for someone who might be using a wheelchair, or someone who is deaf, or an autistic person, whatever the case may be. So I really think once you are immersed in disability, you really do allow yourself to see beyond just your disability.
I definitely would agree with that as well. It's you learn a lot being immersed in it. I feel that I've become a much sharper uh, way of like doing the claims that we handle for our particular firm. I'm able to look outside the box of why did this happen, or so I feel like I'm a little sharper because of being involved in the disabled community. So you're able to represent a little better than missing things because you have no idea, of maybe things that an individual may have experienced or such. So I think it makes you a better version, to know a little bit about different things that people may experience. So I think it's a good thing to be exposed to the disabled community.
AJ, do you have anything to add?
I do not. This is AJ. I do not.
All right, so to help us transition, since this is Activate Diversity and we are thinking towards action, this was touched on quite a bit, is a lot of this fear and stigma about disability does begin for many of us in law school, and looking at and even checking out who's in our audience, whether it's on YouTube or in person, we probably have some law students with us and recent graduates. So asking it is, what is something that you wish you had known while you were in law school that you know as a lawyer or somebody working in the field today? I'm happy to say
This
that
is AJ. Oh, go ahead.
AJ, go for it. You know what? Because
No,
I know I don't answer a lot of questions. So I'm like, I'm happy to say that I wish I knew that I wasn't alone, because I did not meet another autistic law student until my third year of law school. And my very first experience with somebody else who had a disability, there was a blind woman in my 1L section. And our classmates were not necessarily very helpful or accommodating. They were always in a bad mood because she was late to class instead of wondering if there was an inaccessibility or some other issue. And she was not back the second semester. And all I kept thinking is how we must have failed her and how alone perhaps that experience and isolating that experience must have been. Because I found the experience as a disabled law student extremely isolating. And I wish I had known how vast this community is and that I wasn't the only one going through something or the only one who had this life experience, because that is far from true.
I think AJ was next, and then
This is AJ. Haley, can you just repeat the question one more time, please?
Oh yeah, sure. The question was, what is something that you wish you had known in law school as somebody in the profession or as a disabled lawyer today?
This is AJ. I think for me, it's not necessarily something that I wish I would have known, but it's something that I learned as I was going through law school, is that we need more visible and forceful advocacy for disabled students. And that's where I found my place. I think I was a 1L, maybe a 2L when Haley got a lot of attention for being amazing and being sworn in the state of Florida. But there wasn't a ton of advocacy where I was. And I soon found out that there wasn't a ton of advocacy all around the country in terms of making accessibility the baseline, making it mandatory, obligatory, whatever word you want to use. And so for me, to other law students, disabled law students, and future disabled legal professionals, to Haley's point, it's important to know that you're not alone, but it's also know that it takes people willing to do the work and put the work in to make the legal profession more accessible. And I'm lucky that I get to work with a lot of those folks. I know a lot of folks are doing their own things, and I'm happy to be in solidarity with those folks and provide help if they need. But it doesn't happen on its own. And I hope that law students understand that they don't have to be a disability advocate in the legal profession, but it will take someone to do it. And if they want to do that, then they have support and resources in order to be successful doing that for other folks.
This is Denise. I think I'd like to kind of answer the question slightly differently, just because I'm so far removed from law school. And I was fortunate to have a classmate who had disability when we went through together. We didn't always have access to information. And so one of the things that I hope that any student entering law school, everybody always asks about classes and ask about, things you might have to do, particularly in the first year. I hope that if you are a student, if you're a disabled student, that you will take some time out and at least access some resources about what it's like to have a disability going through law school. Because there are, resources out there. I mentioned the Commission on Disability Rights. There are other organizations. And so I think that it would be helpful if before you ever entered the door in law school, if you did that research so that you would know coming in, at least have an intellectual knowledge of what it was going to take, given your disability, to go through law school. That's now available. It wasn't available when I went to law school. It's only in recent years that all of the awareness and all of the resources have been developed.
I'm so glad that you shared that too about resources. So I know we're here to learn and even how law schools are supposed to be accessible and not discriminate. And you might also have law schools and their practices that do cause implicit discrimination and be biased. So we're moving towards that activate part of our webinar today and action items for all of us, so we can learn, so we can do better. And the stories that this panel has been sharing and the wisdom is awesome. So I am just taking a quick moment of gratitude before we move on to action. And one part of that action is that even though we're speaking as lawyers and other professionals with disabilities, our clients, as Denise mentioned, that we're a public serving profession, that our clients may also be people with disabilities or be disabled themselves. So how can we best accommodate and understand the needs of disabled clients?
This is Denise. You really have to educate yourself. As if you, I talked earlier about cultural competency. It starts in law school. It goes throughout your profession. If you are throughout the profession, once you become a lawyer, you have to provide competent representation. And what do we do best as lawyers? We read and we research and we research and we read. And so I think that that's number one, because, and then I think also that if possible, get a chance to know someone with a disability. A lot of times, and I understand that many lawyers may not ever meet a person with a disability and may not ever know, but certainly you can take an opportunity to, get involved with maybe an organization or an affinity bar. Some states have disability affinity bars, and you can certainly interact with those affinity bars, just so that you can be aware. It's now 33 years after the Americans with Disabilities Act. And given all of the resources and all of the things that have been done, these resources are now available to all of us.
Thank you for that. Claudia and AJ, do you have anything to add?
This is Claudia. I don't think I do. I mean, I just feel like it's exactly what Denise has said. Like, I agree wholeheartedly, is educating yourself. If you don't know, then read a little bit about the disability, so you are, going to be as helpful as possible to that client. So I just think that's really key, is knowledge of who you are serving.
And I'm sorry, one key thing is, don't forget to ask your client, what is it that you need? How can I help you? Because at the end of the day, no matter what's there in the way of resources, it's really going to be about your client. So for example, if you're working with somebody who is visually impaired or blind, many clients don't know Braille. I happen to know Braille. Many clients don't know how to use JAWS on a computer and may need documents to be read to them or recorded. So be sure to always ask your client, what do you need? I'm sorry to interrupt you, AJ.
This is AJ. I think that's really important. And I was just going to say, there's a book called Great Minds Think Differently, and it talks about how you can interact with disabled clients. I would say for me, I don't have clients. I have constituents, and I have people that I advocate for. And oftentimes those folks are people with disabilities. So if I'm not culturally competent with disabilities that I don't have or haven't experienced, I'm probably not going to be good on my job or good at my job. So to Denise's point, educating yourself, especially as someone who is temporarily able-bodied, I need to be really, really educated on the experiences of people with physical and mobility disabilities in order to adequately advocate for them and to do it at least minimally competently. So I think education is incredibly important.
Thank you so much. When we previously met, we had a discussion about courtrooms and law firms and this idea of opening the courthouse doors so that people with disabilities can be active participants in society and in the legal system. But as I was thinking about this, we should probably take this a step further. So how do we not just have those doors and opportunities open, but make sure that we are able to metaphorically get down the halls, that we have the chance to succeed, to have competent representation, to be able to appear before a judge and not have our competence called into question, all of these different things. So I'm really getting to the heart of how do we make sure that inclusion is truly there for us.
Mercedes Elysia's hand has been raised.
So I have a question on that, Haley. Is that like, are you saying as an attorney or as the client or as
Whatever, however you feel inclusion would best help you. So I want to be as inclusive as possible.
Okay, so I guess I would put not as an attorney because I'm not, but I would say would be nice to know what to expect, even a layout. Someone, visually impaired is extremely, can be high anxiety when you don't know your surroundings. Uh, it's already scary. You're going to court for whatever reason, even if you're not in trouble. It's kind of like it's just I think it itself has a stigmatism to, oh no, I'm going to court. And it's just like bringing down that anxiety level by just orienting your client into what is going to happen, the expectations. And if they're, I would say again, visually impaired, to know how to get there, like the layout and orienting the individual, just because and also even with cognitive and anything like that, it's like you're gonna forget. So it's just kind of going through what's gonna happen or how to get there and all of those steps. I would think would lessen the whole anxiety of going to court, going through that courtroom doors and such. I would think that would be helpful in those situations.
I do know that, this is Denise, during the pandemic, especially, the ABA Judicial Division had a webinar on access to the courts. And I think that was particularly important for many of the judges, because they had to kind of come to an understanding of what was needed, whether it's access to, with the screen reader or large print using Zoom, or whether you were going to have a transcript for a deaf person so that they would know what's going on in the proceedings. We have also raised the point with the courts administration that they need to have the websites accessible, that courtrooms must have physical accessibility to people on crutches or wheelchairs or have walkers. So a lot of it is getting the court personnel, making them more aware, so that when people are accessing the court, that they feel comfortable doing so. And that's regardless of whether you are a client, a lawyer, or even a judge. Because I do know here in Cook County, I heard a story about a judge who became disabled and was in a wheelchair, could not get to the bench because there were stairs. And so hopefully that experience here in Cook County made the court system more aware that the courts need to be accessible to every party who is going to enter in through the doors.
Thank you for that as well. So
This
something
is-
that, oh, sorry, AJ, jump on in.
Sorry, Haley, this is AJ. I would say from my perspective and my history and my work as an advocate, it's really important to force the issue and demand accessibility. I think a lot of times people are afraid to be unprofessional or impolite. And quite frankly, sometimes you need that to make change and to force change. And so for me and the work I've done in my experiences, I would say don't be afraid to really force the issue and demand access.
Receive the text question, Mercedes Alicia at 617.
So each of you has mentioned a little bit about advocating here. So how can the allies, and especially the folks that I believe AJ referred to as temporarily able-bodied, how can they advocate alongside people with disabilities so all of the work doesn't fall on the marginalized folks in the conversation, that everybody takes responsibility in some way?
Receive the text answer, Chisholm at 61800.
I think this is Denise. I think that as an ally, one of the things you can do is sometimes because sometimes we don't, as disabled people, we don't always speak up because either we're tired of having to speak, or we even sometimes we don't recognize the issue even ourselves. And sometimes while you're not speaking for us, I think that if you speak in from a position of just supporting, I mentioned earlier, well, I don't think I mentioned earlier, sometimes as a blind person, other people, if I go to a restaurant, someone may ask a friend, what does she want? And my good friends, my allies will say, I don't know, ask her. I think those are the kinds of things you can do as an ally when you see that kind of thing happening, is just speaking up and not participating in any kind of ableist behavior.
Chat from Molly must have hosted.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to unmute myself there for a moment. I believe in the interest of time, we are going to take a moment to ask our panelists if there's anything that they want to share with the audience before we transition to audience questions. Is there anything that you feel is important to share before we take some questions?
This is Claudia. I would just say, be vocal, and just definitely always be vocal. If you have a need, let whomever party or whatever know that you need assistance with something. So because it's not only gonna probably affect you, but there's probably others that need that as well. So and just be part of the movement. And if you don't know, then maybe experience it. Do like those I don't know, like dining in the dark, or just something to experience what it is like, so then you can really grasp it a little even more so of what individuals with disabilities go through. But just definitely be vocal, because if you don't say anything, nothing will happen. And we're just going to be, panels and panels, and nothing will get done. So I just think be about the mission and actually do something.
Chat from Chisholm with the host.
So that's all I have.
Thank you so much. AJ and Denise, do you have anything else before we move to audience questions?
I do not.
This is AJ now.
Okay. Thank you to all of our amazing attendees for being here. And thank you, AJ, Claudia, and Denise for such an informative and truly lively discussion. Just some reminders that if you have questions for our panelists, please feel free to place them in the Q&A function or use the raise your hand feature on Zoom, and we will do our best to answer them with the time remaining. If you did type your question, we will make sure to read them aloud so everybody has access. And without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Chisa to read the questions that are posted for the panel.
All right.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
I was going to make one quick note as well, that if you have additional questions that we might not have time to answer tonight, that you're more than welcome to send them to us via email, and the webpage for our event today does have everybody's contact information on it.
All right. This question comes from Victor Marquez. The last thing I would want to do is invade anyone's personal space. How can someone who wants to be helpful help? I have twice had to pull someone out of harm's way when crossing a street in a big city. Had I not pulled him or her, pulled them away, they would have been hit by a car in both instances. Where does an ally draw the line?
Okay, since I mentioned that, I think I can take that, and I think I know the person is asking. If it's a life-threatening situation, then of course you want to, grab the person. When I mention about people being grabby, it's not even anything close to that. It's just that people, even when you're not in any harm's way, people just feel the need to reach out and grab you for no reason. You can just be kind of walking down the hall and they'll just like grab you, or they'll come and say, here, sit over here. And it's like, no, I may not want to sit over there. So it's one thing to be where the situation that was described, where the person would have been hit by a car. That's an emergency situation, but I'm talking about just an everyday, ordinary, everyday situation where you're just walking and minding your own business. You may be lining up, getting ready to cross the street and listening for some traffic, and all of a sudden somebody comes up and takes you and grabs you by the elbow and pulls you across the street. There's no reason for that kind of action.
This is AJ. I would just add that I wouldn't segregate people who have disabilities and non-disabled or apparently non-disabled folks. Like, that question wouldn't be asked if someone who was on their phone wasn't paying attention and you had to save them, right? Like, thinking that someone needs to be saved because of their disability, I think it is a really weird framing. Right? Like, if someone's life is in danger, it's in danger, not because they're disabled, but because of the circumstances. And so I wouldn't couch or view the world in that way, because I'm sure like lots of people need saving and they're not necessarily disabled. So I would just add that to Denise's point.
All right. Question number 2. This is from Pamela. I missed the percentage of attorneys who self-identify as disabled. The song was garbled. Could someone repeat that, please? Repeat the answer to that one.
This is Haley. I'm happy to share that data came from the National Association for Law Placement and their 2022 report on diversity in U.S. law firms, and that number was 1.22% of lawyers who self-identify with having a disability.
Thank you. We have another question from Victor Marquez. Unfortunately, the ABA disability question does not allow and or enable a person with mental health issues to be able to, and I quote, check the box as the standard. I've been told is the disability, and I quote, box is only for physical disability. Can we expand the definition of disability within the ABA to include mental and or emotional disability?
This is Denise. That surprises me a little bit, because I do know that one of the first things that I did when becoming joining the commission is to go to the various entities and try to get lawyers with disabilities, especially those with mental health disabilities, to disclose. So I would recommend that you maybe get in touch with Amy Albright the executive director at the Commission on Disability Rights, as well as Chair Robert Donnerstein, and check that out, because that's kind of a surprise to me. I didn't think that was the case or should be the case.
All right, and we have one last question. This is Mercedes Alicia. She would actually like to voice her question. So Mercedes, I'll turn it over to you. I think Steve may need to unmute you.
Am I being heard right now?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And I would say you guys turned me on right on time. I am an American with disabilities, and it is mental and emotional disabilities and intellectual disability. I have TBI and complex PTSD. And I have been representing my own case as a person who had her Fourth Amendment violated by Bridgeport police. As a ABA criminologist, I graduated from UNH with a criminal justice degree to try to keep our kids out of prison. My family suffered a loss of my uncle being murdered, and other things that we suffered as a Latino family in America. And I've noticed that even with, you know, how you disclose that you have mental disabilities, some of the attorneys that I deal with will still be inconsiderate to understanding that, like, we understand when you're representing and defending that you have to use certain tactics, and certain tactics are used maybe to even piss off the other opponents. But when you keep disclosing that you're disabled, having an intellectual disability, really, there's emotional problems already that disturb the way you function, whether you want it to exist or not. And that is a stigma that that I heard Haley Moss, escrow Haley Moss mention, that she didn't find someone to relate to even in law school till maybe her third year. And that I don't want to say this is what you said, but from what I understood, was that there's a stigma also even in the court system with being a Juris Doctorate with mental illness. So it kind of made me feel good hearing that, because now I don't feel so picked on without being a barred attorney, unable to pass the LSAT successfully and what have you. And I think there is a stigma on mental health that comes from without, that we need to work on for them when we get to the court system, even with the ADA, that disabilities won't only be a disability that can physically be seen, but something that people need to, like Attorney Avant said, education is key to understanding disabilities. And I'm really grateful for joining this Zoom and for everything that everybody has expressed, as today I was struggling. And when you struggle with PTSD and TBI, you already don't want to exist amongst people. So to be coming out in the community and struggling with mental health is a daily struggle. And I think that's something that without the community should be rearranged the same way they did for Department of Mental Retardation. They gave it another name and redeveloped its mission. And it's called now Department of Developmental Services. So I would like for people to start seeing mental health as a disease and an illness and the brain organ. There's like an illness in your liver or a cancer. It is a disease. And I think that the community just needs to have a bigger impact. The ADA means nothing to a lot of these people out here, unfortunately, that feel normal bodied. Thank you for this opportunity.
6:51 p.m. 13 notifications.
This is Haley. I just wanted to thank you for sharing your story and your thoughts with us.
And Haley, that was our last question.
If that is our final question, thank you, Chisa. And I want to thank everybody who attended today's webinar. And I also wanted to give another thank you to the committee, to everybody at GP Solo who supported this, our sponsors, and our panelists, of course. This would not be possible without everybody here. It truly did take a village.